What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods here, back with another FCS conference preview. Like I said, we're going to have a series of team and conference previews, and we got my guy, Kevin Marshall from FCS Nation Radio, man. One of the best guys that I know in this space covering the FCS. And he personally reached out to me when I was getting into the space. So I got a lot of respect for him, and they do great work over there at FCS Nation Radio, man. But Kevin, appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, man, just tell me with that kind introduction if your last name has multiple double letters in it or something. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, you know how it is, man. But listen, a lot of people talk about playoff success and national title contenders, and a lot of people this year are looking at it as a two-horse race with South Dakota State, North Dakota State coming into the season as by far the favorites. But looking at the SoCon this year, a long history of playoff success in this conference. In your opinion, which teams in the conference are primed for potentially a really deep playoff run this year in 2022?
Look, I've said it everywhere I've been talking about the SoCon. There are a lot of leagues where you kind of know what's going to happen, right? And the pundits, will kind of say, well, unless an asteroid hits Earth, either North Dakota State or South Dakota State are probably going to win the Missouri Valley Football Conference. And the two Montanas and are going to be really good in the Big Sky. But in the SoCon, man, you just don't really know. And anybody who says that they do ain't telling you the truth. East Tennessee State, look, they seem to be primed, but there's some things that have gone on around that athletic department since the whistle or the final gun in Fargo of their playoff loss to the Bison that have been a little strange, that been just a little odd. The AD leaves just last week. Kind of odd timing for that, right? A month out from football season at the time. New head coach there in Johnson City, who's been a successful head high school coach in that area before. But as we all know, there are some people who get elevated above their ability. And, you can be a good high school coach. You can be a hell of an offensive or defensive coordinator, but can you run your own program? And we won't know that. And about the Bucks and Coach Quarles until, they get on the field. I think he's smart enough not to go in there and try to, change a whole bunch of stuff, because what Randy Sanders did worked. But obviously it's your program. You're going to put your stamp on it. It's just a matter of how stubborn are you to have it be your team and have everybody notice it, right? But Chattanooga, look, they brought in, almost half of an FBS football team, it seems like, in transfers. But they've done this before, and they ain't sniffed the playoffs since 16. So, at some point, you have to say, well, that this is just who they are. They're a underachieving, very talented football program. And I think this year is going to be quite telling for the Chattanooga Mocs. People seem to either be picking them or ETSU to win the league. But let's not forget that Chattanooga was a 6-5 team last year. And they had every opportunity to get to the playoffs. They couldn't beat the Citadel at home on the last week of the regular season when the Citadel had nothing to play for but pride. Now, everybody who knows, anybody who went to the Military College of South Carolina knows that there is no small amount of pride associated with that particular school and that football program. They don't lay down for nobody. But the fact that they had everything on the line, the Citadel's playing for nothing, really, and you can't beat them in your home stadium for a playoff berth, maybe that's just who you are. Because, they quit on the spring season, and I've always heard that if you quit once, well, it's way easier to quit the second and the third and the fourth time than it was that first time. So maybe that's just who the Mocs are. I hope not. I like Coach Wright a lot. I think he's a very smart and very talented coach. But we'll have to see. And I know in the notes you want to talk about Mercer. Well, look, maybe this is finally Mercer's year. The people in Macon, Georgia have been waiting for that for a while now. They started off really well playing in the Pioneer League. They came into SoCon. They didn't get blown out their first couple of seasons. They were competitive. But they've been, a touchdown here and a couple of games, 3-4 years now from being a playoff team. being a SoCon champion, and they just need something to bring it all together. And it seems like maybe this will be their year. But when you go down further in the picks from the coaches and the media types, you know, look, when you talk about Western Carolina, that's a team that not a lot of people want to see on their schedule. I mean, they ended the season on a roll. They're going to score a lot of points. The only question is, can they stop anybody? And, speaking with people around that program, they're going to be young on defense and they're going to be fast. So if they're going to make a lot of mistakes, man, they're going to make them with a quickness, so there's that, right? I mean, can't teach speed. So we'll just have to see. But as you go down further, I mean, all of the picks were made before people knew about transfers who were coming into particular teams. I mean, the Citadel brings in 13 graduate transfers, more than they've ever had before. It's the only type of transfers they can take. One of them, including a quarterback from Wofford, Peyton Derrick, who was pretty good for them, kind of got pushed out at Appalachian State and then kind of got pushed out at Wofford because they don't want to run the triple anymore. But they have an experienced hand in there who can do very simple things, like hit somebody who's wide open 10 yards down the field to make the linebackers back up. Citadel didn't have that the last couple of years. Now, Jalen Adams was a threat to take the ball to the house every time he had the ball in his hands. But they ran a lot of stuff for him. And so maybe instead of a true triple option, it was more of a double option. Very few times did the ball get to the perimeter. Well, that's where the big plays are in the triple. So, I mean, I think you might see that the fact that Derrick isn't a blazer, he isn't a super fast guy, may make that Citadel offense more efficient. And on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, you got Destin Mack, who I don't know why he's not on people's All-America list. He should be. Got Dominique Poole, got some votes for Freshman of the Year last year. Carson Hatchett, they're going to be solid on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that if you're a SoCon fan, I mean, the one thing you don't want to see are the two military schools picked very low. Because look, man, those guys don't need any more chip on their shoulder. They already have it. And, that it's going to be a super interesting year. Somebody who's picked 7th might win the whole thing, or who's picked 6th might win the whole thing. And like I said, there aren't a lot of leagues that are like that. And I would hate to try to be handicapping to SoCon in Las Vegas. I mean, I think you just flip a coin.
That's a fair assessment. I know, I did a way too early prediction of the conference. Probably, man, it was probably back early summer before the recruiting was over. Some guys entered their names in the transfer portal, and I really liked Mercer, but losing Davis at the running back spot was a really big loss, unexpectedly too. I mean, came out of nowhere, and I think that might impact that team more. But I think when you look at the defensive side of the ball for them with Lance Wise and some of the guys they bring back on the defensive line as well, maybe they can overcome early. But I think a lot of the SoCon teams, man, like you said, I think the degrees of separation in this conference are probably a lot less than you see from top to bottom in other conferences. But you kind of beat me to my punch about Mercer, because like I said, I picked them in my way too early. I'm about to start releasing my own previews on the website, so we'll see if I stick with them. But for you, as a SoCon guy who has seen this conference, seen this team develop, give me a percentage of chance that this could be the year for Mercer to win their first ever conference title at the FCS level?
35%. And I think that
That's
may
not
be
bad.
being generous, I mean, and that's taken into account that maybe it's going to be shared,
Right.
so, there's that. So, I mean, we'll have to see. But when you talk about Mercer, they have everything they need to be successful. Macon, Georgia goes up for that team. They have a beautiful little stadium. The funding is there. It just seems like I said, a touchdown here, a missed field goal here. In the first couple of 3 years, maybe it was in 3 games. That was the way it was. Then it was 2 games. Well, last year it was 1 game. So let's see if they can continue to build upon that. But look, Mercer did bring in some pretty talented running backs. One guy from James Madison, I think Jackson is his last name. So, they ought to be okay there. And, I think the question for me would be about Mercer would be the offensive line and the defensive lines. Offensive and defensive line would probably be pretty good for them. But you mentioned Lance Wise. I mean, the SoCon is a linebacker driven league. It has been for a long time. And Wise is one of the best you'll ever see. I mean, the guy, he's good in coverage. He can come up and stop your run game, and he gets off of blocks too. I mean, there are a lot of teams in Georgia who are not FCS that would really like to have had Lance Wise. But also, when you look at Chattanooga, I mean, All America offensive lineman, All America defensive lineman. You had a first round draft pick, Cole Strange, and the last NFL draft. But you want to talk about a school who's put some dudes into Sunday football. Let's talk about Samford. I mean, they got some, and strangely enough, some guys on defense from Samford, which is, the Samford Bulldogs are not known for playing a great deal of defense, but there's several, defensive backs, a safety who have come out of that place in the last several years, and it wasn't just Duck Hodges, who had his moment with Pittsburgh. But, you want to talk about a team that has, they've done the least with the most, it seems like recently. And, you have to wonder, brought in a bunch of transfers as well this year. You have to wonder if the handwriting isn't on the wall there that, Coach Hatcher has to produce something significant this year, or perhaps maybe, they go in another direction. But Samford, they're going to score too. And just like Western Carolina. So, the question is, like always, can they stop if they're going to score 42? Can they stop somebody from scoring 45? So, and we'll just have to see. But I mean, the SoCon just has you're going to see a different style of play every week. Especially now that Wofford is out of running the triple option. So, it's going to be physical. Teams are going to try to run the ball mostly, except for just a couple of teams who run that air raid. And, you're going to have to strap up your helmet, and your defensive backs are going to have to want to and be willing to tackle in this league. You're not just going to have a lot of guys who are going to be, well, I'm a cover corner. Well, you can't be against triple option or, a Chattanooga team who runs a lot of power. East Tennessee State under the previous regime the same way. If you're going to have to tackle in spaces, and, a lot of DBs don't like to do that. So, look, anybody's league to win, I think. And hopefully, I was on another guy's show, Chris Hammond, who I know pretty well, just like I do, the Football Chris show. And we talk about that, we need a team in the SoCon to get 3 teams in. You kind of need one to go 8-0, right?
Yeah.
And the other teams are going to beat each other up. But maybe you can sneak the second and third place team in. Not sure anybody's going to be able to do that this year. So, I mean, I think it's a 2-bid league, should be a 3-bid league. We'll have to see what happens further on down the line. But I know this, and I know people get tired of me talking about it. I say it a lot. But, man, when you got 15 teams in your conference, like the CAA is going to have next year, or the plethora of teams that are in the Big Sky, it just, and then you have conferences that have 9 teams and everybody plays one another. I mean, championships and playoff berths should be decided on the field, not by the schedule maker. And that irks me a little bit. And I think everybody in the world who has a Twitter account probably knows how much that irks me.
I think a lot of people know. I know you and my guy Kyler, big Eastern
Love
Washington
Kyler
guy
Neal.
over there.
I even bought his red turf repping shirt. And I wear it around Montana. People don't really care for that much. But it is what it is, man. I got a piece of the red field. I gave it to one of my very good Grizz fan friends. And he said, well, I normally would burn this, but I don't mind wiping my feet on it. So, that's where that went. But, again, 3 teams should be the mantra for the SoCon. And I hope we can get back to that. And don't think quality of play has led to us not having that. I think it's just been a numbers game, and it's been a parity deal. And, you know, like I said before, it's one of the best things about that league, but it's also one of the limiting things for postseason berths about that league is that anybody can beat anybody. And, you know, you talk about the team that was, I don't know if they were unanimous picked last, but, you know, maybe one, the coaches picked one, the media picked one. But, I mean, just look at how far Wofford has fallen down. You know, Wofford is a team
Yeah.
that, you know, they're one of the few teams that have come, you know, 25 miles north of us in Missoula, come into Washington Grizzly Stadium and beat the Grizz in the playoffs. You know, you can count that number of teams on these, you know.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, evidently they think that, you know, moving away from the triple option is something that they needed to do to advance further in the playoffs. You know, that may be true, but it don't help you to move to the spread to advance further in the playoffs if you can't win enough games to get into the playoffs, right? You know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like the old, you know, a cart before the horse deal there. So, I mean, Wofford has fallen down significantly, and there are grumblings in that program. You know that they had such stability in the head coach for so long. You know, and then you know you have a guy who comes in and wants to change everything. And you know, we're both Southerners. We just you know, by nature we fear change, right? You know, it's part of who we are as a culture, right? Uh, but at Wofford, man, it certainly wasn't broke. I don't understand why they felt like they needed to fix it.
Yeah, I think you kind of saw the same thing at Georgia Tech too, where they're still trying to kind of
Yes.
find their footing with a new type of offense. Where they were, I mean, going to Orange Bowls, winning, like competing
Yep.
for the ACC championship with the triple option. But I guess because of the outside pressure, they felt like they needed to make a change. But before we get into the predictions, one of the things that just kind of came to my mind as we were talking about other conferences. A lot of people have asked me about the SoCon and their position in conference realignment. And the word that's been used a lot is almost complacent because the SoCon has not lost anyone, but they haven't even really been in talks to gain anybody. And one of the things that a lot of people have talked about is the Big South, the MEAC, a lot of these conferences that are in the footprint of the SoCon seem to kind of be on rocky ground. In your opinion, do you think do you foresee the SoCon trying to make a move, or is complacency, the best word to describe it, where they're probably not going to participate very much in conference realignment?
Look, I'm of the mantra that if you don't play football, you ought to get out. That's you know, and or if you're not willing to fund football at the Southern Conference level, ought not to be there. Hi, Davidson. That's why you're no longer in the SoCon. So which they would much rather be. Now they can tell you that the bunch they're involved in up north in basketball is where they want to be, and I don't think Davidson wants to be flying to a road game to San Diego. I really just don't think that's true. But look, the fact that everybody else seemed to have gotten rated, and the SoCon has come in to this radical realignment with the exact same lineup is pretty cool, right? So yeah, they didn't add anybody, they didn't lose anybody. So, and I think that you can tell a lot by what's going to happen with that, by what just happened with Campbell. You know, uh, Campbell is a school where football is on the rise. Baseball, which is important in the SoCon, it's important in the southern states. People out west don't understand that, but it's the truth. Basketball isn't terrible. The fact that they had no interest, it seemed, to adding them and let them go to the CAA tells me that the SoCon's not going to add anyone. And the 9 teams that they have for football are the perfect number, they feel, and that's just the way it's going to be. I mean, Campbell was an associate member of the SoCon for wrestling, and and they actually won the SoCon championship a couple of times in wrestling. So, and that tells you that an athletic department is serious about athletics, because it's hard to compete nationally in wrestling in the South. It just is. It's a Midwestern, Iowa, Idaho, that area of the country where they draw as many for wrestling as Ole Miss and Mississippi State do for college baseball, right? It's kind of like their version of college baseball. But Campbell's been very good at that. But the fact that you didn't add them, you had no interest in adding them and Elon, and you've allowed the CAA's tent or nose to get under your tent, tells me that Spartanburg and the league office is not interested in expansion in any way at all. And I'd be surprised if they add anybody. And they're probably not going to lose anybody either, because it's going to cost you $2 million to get out. And schools have a good bit of money, but the thing is, at the FCS level, very few people have the big donors that are going to be able to write a check for $2 million just because you want to play in another conference. But you mentioned the MEAC and the Big South. Man, will we even be talking about the Big South 3 years from now? Will it still exist as a viable football conference? I don't know the answer to that. The MEAC, look, I've been a South Carolina State fan for a long time. Since Coach Willie Jeffries was there. It's really good football, always has been. I want to see that league do well. I just don't know who they can add. I mean, Savannah State tried to be a Division I program, and it didn't work out for them, so they've dropped back down. I just don't know where the new blood is going to come from for the MEAC or the Big South to do anything but merge. Maybe that end up being what you're going to see. And if that's the case, what happens with the Celebration Bowl? Are HBCU fans going to be okay with Jackson State versus Charleston Southern in the Celebration Bowl? Something tells me that that's probably a non-starter for a lot of people, So, I mean, it's perilous times for those two leagues. And I would much rather be in the Southern Conference's position than those two.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know that was kind of where that question stemmed from. So a lot of people look at the SoCon as almost like the escape for South Carolina State, for one being, perfectly, in the geographical location of the SoCon and have a history of playing SoCon teams in the
Yep.
season as well. So that's a big question. Buddy Pugh doing an amazing job over there. But
one of my
you
favorite
mentioned
coaches.
Absolutely. I love talking to him at MEAC Media Day, but this is the SoCon preseason media poll that they dropped at SoCon Media Day. So looking at this, I mean, you see Citadel, Wofford at the bottom, Sanford, VMI, Western Carolina, Furman kind of in that mid-range, ETSU and Mercer tying for second, Chattanooga getting 18 first-place votes to lead the conference. Looking at this list, we'll start here. Who are your sleeper teams in the conference that you won't be surprised that are outside maybe the top four that could go on and win this conference?
Well, first of all, let me say that one of those 7 first-place votes for ETSU was from me. We have a fine affiliate there, WXSM in Johnson City, does a great job. But look, I think if you're looking at teams that are going to finish higher than their predictions, perhaps VMI. That school is, people think the spring was a long time ago. Well, it kind of was. That weird spring season was, it's been a minute now. But VMI, they lost some guys because they have no grad school. So, you have to spend an extra semester as a cadet in the barracks versus anywhere else where you can go live off campus. At Citadel, your grad school, you can live off campus, wear civilian clothes, be a normal like college student. But at VMI, you can't because they don't have a grad school. But I think VMI is a team that will perhaps finish in the top bit of that. And, because look, they do what they do. They play a bit more defense for an air raid team than what Sanford and Western Carolina can. So I think, they have one of the best linebackers in the country in Stone Snyder. That's a great name for a linebacker, isn't it? But, you have that. And also, when you look, I know we talked about it, Western Carolina, if they can figure out a way to get off the field on third down 4 or 5 times a game, they're going to be dangerous. Team that we haven't talked about, and it's not just because I dislike them vehemently, is the Furman Paladins. And look, Furman, Uh, lose the offensive coordinator. I know they brought in some guys, new OC, and they want to be more dynamic. They have one of the best tight ends in the country, but Furman was lacking a lot of team speed. It seemed like to me, they had a lot of big lumbering type guys. They didn't have that traditional wide receiver that Furman has had that can burn you deep, and they just didn't have that. And we'll see if they can develop that. Not a lot of big plays in that Furman offense that George Quarles, who's now the head coach at East Tennessee State, ran, except for that tight end Ryan Miller. He had some big plays for them. Furman's always been a team that has absolutely killed people with tight end across the middle. It's been in that Furman offense since Art Baker. So, but when you also speaking about teams that can do a little better than projection, look, I'm a huge homer, I'll admit it. But if the Citadel doesn't finish in the top half, I'll eat my hat. And it's a Frisco hat, so I won't season it none neither. But look, with the guys they brought in, the defense they have, look, I'm not saying that they'll win the SoCon championship. Would you need to defibrillate me if they did? No, because this is going to be a pretty good Citadel team. And 8th or 9th, no, sir. There used to be that was where they were picked every year, and somehow they'd finish 3rd, 4th, or 5th every year, or 2nd, or never where they were picked. So I just wonder if a lot of the media who were picking this, maybe just started following SoCon football like in the last 2, 3, 4 years. But we'll see. But again, my friend, nobody knows. Anybody who says that they do, they ain't telling the truth. Chattanooga could win 2 games. ETSU could completely fall apart under George Quarles missing Randy Sanders. Look, a lot of things have to go your way. A lot of bounces have to go your way to win the SoCon. And, and that's just the way it is. I've said it before, 4, 5, 6 plays in 2 or 3 ball games going to decide the difference between who finishes 1st and who finishes 5th. And that's the way the league's always been. And it's just a question of who's going to make those plays.
I completely agree. I mean, for me, looking at it, I think my first pick would be Western Carolina, just because, I mean, when I look at a team that could outplay their predictions, I look for a team that was young, a team that lost close games, and a team that has a good coaching staff. And just in my opinion, one of my favorite coaches in the FCS is Kerwin Bell. I think he is completely overlooked at what type of culture he could really build. I think if you look at his coaching history, he has a history of winning, has a history of getting to national championships, being able to recruit, and he comes in, and if I'm not mistaken, I know different recruiting sites differ, but I believe Western Carolina had the #1 SoCon class by like a significant amount.
Yep.
Last season.
And it seemed like they moved from Cullowhee to Florida.
Yep.
You could definitely tell a focus on, the Sunshine State. I'm a Kerwin Bell believer too. I mean, horrible touchdown celebrator, but excellent, football coach. Worst touchdown celebration you're ever going to see, right? But and the fact that, look, the one thing that I think may hold the Catamounts back is last year they had a quarterback that had been in Bell's system for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And this year, he's gone. You're going to have to break in a new guy. And one of the things that, if they are going to overachieve, one of the things they can't do is get off to a slow start like they did last year. One of the things about the SoCon too is that, unlike a lot of leagues, there are conference games early in the season. So, we're going to know a lot about what's what.
Yeah.
In the first 3 weeks of the season. The Citadel going to Campbell to open up and then hosting East Tennessee State. Chattanooga opens against Wofford. So, we're going to know a lot pretty early. And then, but what's going to happen later on down the line might not have anything to do with what's happened in the first 3 weeks. it's just such a grind in the SoCon. It's such a physical league that when you play someone, like a Samford, not it's almost like a week off, but they are certainly not as physical as Chattanooga is, or as the Citadel is. So it's and can that basketball on grass type deal be successful in a league where the mantra for 50 years seems to be control the clock, move the chains, get off the field on third down, and be solid on special teams. That, and none of that is, throw it 50 times, isn't real conducive to, that type of success, which seems to be the way you win the SoCon. So it'll be very interesting to see. And that, I know I've said it like 5 times, but I just want to reiterate it again. That's what makes this league so cool, is that, you just don't know. And it's exciting every year. It's a good brand of football. It's played by mostly really good kids. And I love the league. It's been a part of my life since I can remember. And but I'm as hard on them as anybody. I know that they probably particularly, don't like it when, some of the things about, the refs and, lack of social media interactions, but I only do that because I care about it, and that's, and it comes from a place of love, how about that, so, but again, who knows what's going to happen? I don't. I'd like to think that I do, but I really don't, and nobody does.
I mean, I like the message there, and I mean, I think looking at the potential sleeper teams, I think Sanford and the Citadel are 2 very interesting ones, just because the transfer portal, I think, killed Sanford this year, and also graduation, losing a guy like Montrell Washington, who is, every report that I've heard come out of Broncos camp is that he is going to be a real factor at wide receiver, not just return specialist. And we know how special he is when he gets in the open field on special teams. He's electric. And they lose the other all conference wide receiver. I'm blanking on his name now. He ends up at, I think, Middle Tennessee State, AJ Toney. Then they lose, of course, Chris Oladuncan to South Dakota State last year, who's now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They also lose this their starting quarterback from last year. I mean, they've went through a lot of changes, and they lose the all conference defensive tackle to Alabama A&M. I mean, the list goes on, and then even the all conference safety Chris Edmonds, who probably might have had an argument to be the best defensive back in the conference while he was there, is off to Arizona State. So, man, the Citadel is, I mean, Sanford, as good as that team has been and had so much talent, I'm just wondering, can they reload with so many unexpected, I would say, departures? And with the Citadel, I think I'll say this: the question mark for them is Alex Ramsey's health, because
Yes.
I know him coming back was a huge deal. Like, won't say the name. When I was going to SoCon Media Day, I had a Campbell coach on the staff reach out to me and says, anything you hear about Alex Ramsey, I need to know. He was like, because we are terrified that he's going to suit up and come out there and put on a show. And, you know, Coach Brent Thompson said that he probably isn't going to be ready early in the season, but when he gets back,
Yeah,
and that
I wouldn't
offense gets
believe that.
rolling,
I wouldn't
you don't
believe
believe that
that.
at all?
I wouldn't believe that. No, no. And the gamesmanship is a thing, and but you're right about Ramsey. I'm unaware of anybody, uh, you know, graduating from VMI and then transferring to the Citadel as a grad student. And he got hurt. He decided to sit out the spring. Then he got hurt before in fall camp last year. So will he be 100% for the opening game? Maybe, but it's college football, ain't exactly Belichickian, right?
That's true.
With the injury report, but but you're talking about Sanford. Look, this has been a program that has tried to bring in transfers before and have them be a cohesive team, and it hasn't really worked for them. And will it work this time? I mean, history tells us probably not. So
Right.
I think maybe they are what they are. But I said it earlier on, if they don't do something this year, I honestly believe somebody else is going to be leading them next year. And it's going to have to be a complete and total tear down rebuild, I think.
Th-
Like on a Cal Poly type tear down and
Yeah.
rebuild, where you went from running the triple to try to run the air raid. Well, it's going to take you a whole recruiting cycle pretty much to be able to do that. So, there's certainly been, the shot was given to Chris Hatcher at Sanford. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he's been there a long,
Yeah.
long time, and they've won exactly, nothing. So really, um, but you're right about Alex Ramsey. But here's the thing. Like I said, uh, the fact that there's an experienced hand at quarterback for the Little Bulldogs. They brought in a 242-pound B back from SMU to back up Ramsey. He's a load to bring down. It's my understanding he's the fastest kid. He's not going to run away from you. But when you want 4 yards of play out of that guy, a guy who's 240 pounds, a little tough to bring down. So, but defense is there. If I had to pick one team that I would say is going to overachieve tremendously from where they're picked, it would be my Little Dogs.
I I don't mind that pick because I mean I think when you look at especially with the departure of Chris Edmonds, I don't even know. I was talking to an ETSU guy who was very very high on some of the defensive backs who with Jalen Price and then there's another one at ETSU that's an absolute stud. I'm blanking on his name right now, but Destin Mack in my opinion is the best corner in the SoCon right now, and when you look
And
at his
Poole is
game,
somebody who, as a sophomore, look, it was his first year playing corner last year, man, ever.
yeah,
And you're getting votes for freshman of the year.
yeah,
This he might be the most Mac may be the most solid player right now, but I think Poole
yeah,
has an opportunity to be like D Delaney at our level. So
yeah.
but man, I'll tell you again. What do you think? You've asked me what I think. Who do you think's going to win the league, man? You made me put it out there. You tell me.
We were getting there. We were getting to the
Okay, all
SoCon
right.
predictions,
Okay,
our
okay.
top 3. That was the next one. I was, always with the guests, I let them go first. I kind of give mine. But I'll take this one. For me, I'm going to lean due to some of the late departures that Mercer had. I'm a just by a hair give it to Chattanooga. I know, like you said, they were a 6-5 team last year, but when I look at there's talent and then there's dominant. Like I think when you look at a guy, even just in college football history, like a Ndamukong Suh, he was just dominant. Like you had to game plan for him or he was going to wreck your day. That is how I feel about Devontae Maxwell at the defensive line spot for Chattanooga coming into this year. He just, when you look at some of the little bit of weight he's put on, he's looking a lot faster. And we saw what he did last year. I think potentially he could be one of the most devastating and most impactful defensive linemen who he can play outside. He can play the 3 tech, be able to move him around and putting him in good situations, I think is really going to set him up for success. I also love the offensive lineman. Listen, I know they lost Cole Strange, but you mentioned him earlier. McClendon Curtis is still a problem at in that offensive line. And me being a former O lineman, I absolutely love his game. And they got some young guys coming up who I think could be really good as well. It's really hard to see the field at Chattanooga in offensive line. They're returning their leading rusher. The one question I have is can they get a guy at quarterback who can win them the game? And that's the question for me is do they have that game changer quarterback? Because I think when you look at the team, offensive line set, your running back set, you solid on the defensive line, linebacker with Ty Beck and some of those guys they have coming back set there as well. The secondary looks I would say acceptable. We'll see if anyone emerges as a superstar back there. But quarterback, got to have a quarterback to make a deep run in the playoffs. You might be able to win the SoCon if depending on how the schedule works out, but to win in the playoffs for the conference, you better get a quarterback. So that's the one question I have. And if Chattanooga doesn't win the conference this year, I have real question marks on if they're going to be able to break through with a team that they have coming in the future because it's lined up very nicely for them. I got Mercer at 2. I still think Mercer is going to come through, and then I'm going to slide ETSU and Western Carolina into that 3 and 4 spot. I think you could probably flip them. I'm really interested to see Tyler Riddell's development at the quarterback spot. I did hear from camp that he wasn't the shoe-in at starter, but talking to Coach Quarles at SoCon Media Day, based on what he was saying, Riddell's separated himself in so far throughout the summer and fall camp. So it looks like Riddell's probably going to be the guy. And I think the SoCon might be the only conference where you had a backup win Offensive Player of the Year for preseason and Jacob Sailors
Yep.
at the running back spot, who's an absolute stud. But I do have some question marks outside of Tavon Matthews on the offensive line, and I don't know if they have the game changer on the defensive line that you're going to need to go up against some of these physical offensive lines. And that's the big question mark for me for ETSU. But I think Western Carolina, I've already mentioned it, Kerwin Bell, talking to him and all the talent he got from Florida at the defensive back spot, if some of those young guys have breakout years and that defense can, I won't even say be good, to be honest with you, man. I'm saying if they can just be like top 6, top 5 in the SoCon, that team is going to be really tough to beat. So I think you could flip those around. But those would probably be my top 4 teams right now in the SoCon.
I have a tendency to agree with you, but you hit the nail on the head about Chattanooga. You know, is Copeland the guy? I mean, it seems like he's going to be given every opportunity to prove that he's not.
Yeah.
They bring in the transfer from one of the directional Michigans,
Yeah.
Eastern or Western. I mean, I have a hard time keeping those straight. But he is not a big fella. He's not your prototypical college quarterback. But you hit the nail on the head. Chattanooga, man, the lines are fantastic. But if you don't have a guy who's taking the ball from the shotgun or under center, who can go out and have a 2-minute drive to win the football game, you're not going to win the SoCon. And that's what they've been lacking. And I think it was telling that you mentioned ETSU quarterback situation. I think that team relied heavily on Quay Holmes and Jacob Sailors
Absolutely.
last year.
Yep.
And that really, I mean, Riddell didn't have to be that good because the guys
No.
were just wide stinking open, and I think that what you saw in the Fargo Dome was, the fact that they could go man on man. The Bison could, with the receiver, stack the box, which other teams weren't able to do. And, that obviously that hurt them. But, in my mind, and obviously, in the minds of the other media people and the coaches, Riddell is serviceable, but he's not like, if ETSU is the best team, he's not going to win SoCon Offensive Player of the Year. He's just not that type of player. And, but, with Western, I totally agree with you, dude. If they can just get off the field 4 or 5 times, that will help them tremendously. And because, like we discussed, they're going to score points. But I think the wild card is Mercer. And,
Yep.
I think that Mercer, and maybe they'll simplify things a little bit, but Coach Cronick runs an offense that isn't particularly easy. They want to do so many things, give you so many looks. Heck, there were a couple of times on film I saw them in the flex bone last year.
Yeah.
Now it may have been weird how they got there with the receivers and all, but that's what it was. And the fact that they want to do so many things, I wonder if they just don't feel now they don't have to try to fool you. They can come out and do what they want to do. And I think if that's the case, I think you may see this be Mercer's year. But we'll have to see. And I'm very interested. Who knows? Furman could, with a new coordinator, maybe, they have some guys who, were buried on the depth chart who come out and do extremely well. Like I know it's the mantra. Nobody really knows. And I think one thing that we do know is that it's going to be a long year for Wofford, I think. And, again, that is just odd to say.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, week 1, quarterback questions in Chattanooga, maybe Wofford shocks them.
Yep.
I do know this, that every week in this league is, you can't afford to lose ball games to people that you ought to beat, because it does come back to bite you. And we'll have to see, brother. I'm as excited about this SoCon season as I have been in a long time. I'm as excited about this FCS season as I have been for a long time. It's hard not to be excited living where I live in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana. Bozeman's a couple of 100 miles away. Missoula's 25 miles away. Going to Big Sky Media Day, I'll tell you, Bobby Houck does not lack for confidence, but there seemed to be a little extra spring in his step in Spokane. And I think that if they can get good quarterback play, look, they were in that ball game against James Madison until the quarterback got hurt, and they had no depth there. Well, now they do. They bring in Lucas Johnson from the other SDSU, right? The one in San Diego, right? He's and they also bring in a kid who was a walk-on at Oregon to be the backup. So there's going to be depth at quarterback, and with Marcus Knight returning. He's kind of their Alex Ramsey. When will he be in there? This just doesn't feel like this year everybody's playing for the right to lose to the Bison in Frisco. I think there are a couple of teams that could give NDSU and will give NDSU a run however the bracket shakes out once we get done with the regular season.
I think that number one contender. I mean, there was, when I was making my bracket, I know a lot of people, and I know like Reddit FCS and some people were talking about. I mean, yes, you got to give North Dakota State the benefit of the doubt, just because I mean it's very rare for a team who is coming off their 9th national title in the last 11 years to be returning the amount of talent that they're returning outside of Christian Watson, and they lost the one linebacker to West Virginia, but really outside of that and Cordell Volson, everybody is coming back. Like Spencer Wagee's got like 8 years of eligibility, and he's a multiple-time All-American. Like I get why they're looked at like that, but I think when you start looking a little bit underneath about the spring season really made the fall season for me very weird. Even being a newer FCS guy, and I remember watching the FCS when I was younger, I was a big Jacksonville State fan growing up. I just felt weird because there were so many guys who couldn't play due to injury or missed half the season due to injury or got injured in the fall season because their bodies couldn't play 20 games, 30, 25 games in a year if you made a deep playoff run. And so I think this year we're gonna see a lot of teams like South Dakota State. I keep telling people they're not going to roll over for North Dakota State, and that team is going to be a problem. Like Mark Gronkowski is the real deal. I think people forget what he could do. And listen, Isaiah Davis, I'm just going to tell you guys, is a problem at running back. And when you have an offensive line with 3 All-Americans on it, potentially all 5 could be all-conference players by the end of the year. I mean, it's the secondary, we'll see what it turns out. But I'm glad you mentioned Montana. I know we're supposed to be a SoCon episode, but last episode I had Chris on, talking about the Big Sky, and he went with Montana State. But for me, I know everyone keeps bringing up the quarterback problems for Montana, man, but I don't know if it's just me because I've seen them play and I've done a little bit of film study on them. Lucas Johnson is the real deal in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't go 8-1 as a starter at San Diego State, including a bowl game win, and be a scrub. Right. And you give him Marcus Knight coming back, who, just to let you know, is going to suit up week 1. They just did an interview with him in fall camp, and he said that in the interview, he almost was in tears because he's so excited to get out there. So when you're that motivated and you got fresh legs and you're healthy, he could be a problem. And that defense, man, I mean, listen, I'm not biased, but Justin Ford, in my opinion, I think, in my opinion, is the best defensive back in the country, and could potentially rank above a lot of FBS guys at the corner spot with the talent that he has. And then you got Patrick O'Connell, of course. Alex Grubner comes back at the defensive tackle spot. We'll see. I think the one question mark, O'Connell plays a little bit of edge, but do they have a guy when they need O'Connell to play more of a linebacker spot? Can someone get to the quarterback from the edge? That's a question mark. And we know what the offensive line question marks have been for Montana over these past few seasons, but Man, I'm excited. I'm just as excited as you. I think there's a lot of good teams, and there's a lot of up and coming teams. I think
Yep.
as well, where you have new names. You have Mercer being ranked in, I think, 4 top 25s now, in the preseason from different media outlets, including you and myself, and I believe Hero. I don't remember if it was Hero or Athlon had them, and I think they were in the FCS stats. And so Mercer, I don't think has been ranked in the preseason. I can't remember the last time that they were almost a consensus pick to be in the top 25, just off the top of my head. And then you've got Jackson State potentially being a top 10 team by the end of the year with a 5-star corner coming in with all that talent that Coach Sanders has put together. You have, I mean, there's just so many up and coming. I think even you can look at like an Incarnate Word with
Hmm.
GJ Kinney coming in.
Hmm.
They get a grad transfer quarterback, but Incarnate Word's got a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball that I think people are kind of, in my opinion, overlooking. I think I was talking to Chris. Sacramento State, in my opinion, I know it's a team that hasn't really been proven in the playoffs, but man, if they can get it together, that returning 9 starters from a team who just won the Big Sky for the second time, man, that if that
Look,
team makes some waves in the playoffs, I would be concerned to see them on the schedule.
all Troy Taylor's done is go 15-1 in the Big Sky since he's
Exactly.
been at SAC, and yeah, it's easy to, to say, well, the playoff success hasn't been there, and it hasn't. But, I put them at number 5. I ranked them above Montana State in my preseason poll. And I put Montana at 2, Montana State at 7. I think just like we discussed with some SoCon teams, Montana State, yeah, the skill guys they're having to replace, tough, right? I mean, McCutcheon, you know, uh, Afonso is going to be back, which is good for them. But 2, 3 offensive linemen going to be new faces, and
Yep.
we all know that, yeah, those guys might end up gelling, and it will probably end up being a really good group. But will it be a really good group for Gold Rush? I
Yeah.
mean, we'll have to see. So, or and the week 2, or is it going to take them 2, 3, 4 weeks to gel together? We'll
Yeah.
see. But that's the only reason why I put Montana State lower than most people did, is because they have those question marks on the offensive line. But you mentioned the Grizz, and look, it's the Grizz are back was the mantra, right, of
Yeah.
Montana fans for 4, 5, 6 years. But I think it's actually true, and I think if Coach Hauk was being honest, he would say that last season and the season before they were probably a little ahead of the schedule that he had for them in
Yeah.
their mind. A little bit more success came a little earlier than he probably thought. I think this is the year, and I'd be disappointed if the Grizz, didn't win the Big Sky and didn't make a nice deep run in the playoffs. And look, it's really strange, right, that uh, Montana State, gets to the national championship game, and it makes it a really successful season for them. But you have some people who root for the Bobcats who don't consider it a successful season unless they beat the Grizz, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So uh, so if you ask Montana State people, would you rather be the runner-up nationally and lose to the Grizz, or beat the Grizz and lose in the second round of the playoffs, right? So
Yeah.
but man, it's as wide open beyond North Dakota State as it's been in a long time. And like you mentioned, man, NDSU just brings a whole lot of dudes back, and it's hard not to say, that
Yeah.
their head that. But you would just happen to think, right? And I've discussed this with some people before, that yes, they've been dominant in winning titles, but man,
Yeah.
just like we talked about with the SoCon, 4, 5, 6 plays, you know, uh, just think about that Brock Jensen quarterback draw against Georgia Southern. If he gets
Yep.
tackled at the 1 yard line, the drive Wentz had in the championship game,
Hmm.
things have kind of gone their way. Now,
Yep.
champions make those type of plays, but you would
Yep.
think that at some point, one season, maybe they'd throw a pick six, or the ball would, they'd put the ball on the ground when maybe that happened during the spring season, right?
I think
A
I think
whole
you could
bunch of
consider.
luck kind of went away from them then,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
think you could consider that because, I mean, really, if you look back at that season, I, do you have do you have a different perspective of how that playoffs would have went if it was played in the fall and Trey Lance doesn't opt out of the season?
Wow. Wow. I mean,
So, I mean,
yeah, yeah,
COVID really and truly probably is the only reason they don't have 10 out of the 11 national
absolutely.
championships
Absolutely.
because you
Absolutely.
have a because you prepare because even in the fall they play the exhibition with Trey Lance, so
Right.
you
Against Central
prepare
Arkansas. Yep.
all season for Trey Lance, who never lost a college game, to go out there and play, never had a turnover, and then all of a sudden he's out and you got to throw somebody in last second. I tell people all the time, like, really and truly, people better be lucky that the COVID season pushed to the spring because if they get
Yes.
Trey Lance, I don't know if that team gets beat in the playoffs like they did,
Yep.
in my
Yep.
opinion.
And I really like Cam Miller. You know, it
Yeah,
it
I do
seems
too.
like they've brought in an FBS transfer to try to replace him now, what, 2 times?
Yeah.
And he's still there. And, and I think that's a guy his teammates have to believe in,
Oh
because
yeah.
man, they've done everything but sit you down and say, "We don't think you're the guy." But man, they've
Exactly.
had to go to him and he's proven that he is the guy. And as
I,
easy as it is for a kid now to say, "Well, it's not going my way right at here at this place. I want to get in the portal and I want to transfer somewhere else." He didn't do that. He stayed and he fought. And man, you
yeah.
got to admire that. And I really like him. I think having a full season and then the off season with the reps, his short passing game will get better. And I think Cam Miller, he might not be somebody we're going to talk about in the same breath as Wentz and Lance,
Yeah.
but he could be an Easton Stick type guy,
Yeah.
very easily. And I think NDSU's primed. I like those people in Fargo. I will say this: most of them have handled their success with that Midwestern aw shuck.
Yeah.
I mean, they could be just absolutely disgustingly arrogant if they wanted to, right? They've earned the right to
Yeah. Oh,
be,
yeah.
but they're not. And I think that you betcha, type of whole attitude, is why they're not. But man, again, I don't think this season is just who's going to get to Frisco and get beat up by North Dakota State. I think it's real wide open, and I'm as excited as I've ever been, my friend.
I think it's really good for the FCS too, because I know experience and all the losses. There's a lot of uncertainty. I feel like from some fans on like what the future of the FCS looks like with realignment. Because I mean, you look over the past few seasons, like the FCS has experienced some losses and everything.
But
I
it
think a lot of
always
people are
has.
worried. Yeah,
It
there's
always
just a lot of
has.
worry. I think it's
I
uncertainty
mean,
though, like you mentioned that. I mean, because I
yeah,
think there's uncertainty about the group of five too. Because if the Power Five power structure kind of breaks away from the NCAA, a lot of people are like, "All right, well, what happened?" So I think it's more uncertainty than anything. But I think having a new champion, I think it is for me. I'm a dynasty guy. Like I love when I love any dynasty because I think it's amazing to see something that's hard to do like that. And so it would be great to see North Dakota State get a 10th national title in 12 years or whatever it is. Like that would be and with three different head coach, I mean, it's incredible what they've done. But I think for the longevity, it would be great if somebody else got it, especially a first time winner too,
right.
that went in there and got it, like a South Dakota State, or even, I'm a lot higher than some people just because a triple option has a different effect. But man, if Kennesaw State can make a deep run and make a little bit of waves, that would be really fun to watch, I think, because I really like Xavier Shepard. I
I do
think
too.
in terms of an athlete, man, you can't take anything away from him. And I think a lot of people do just because of the offense he runs. But I mean, if South Dakota State goes in there and wins, or even Montana State breakthrough, I know they got previous national titles, but it's been a long time, or just someone comes through and kind of shakes it up a little bit. I think it'd be good for the FCS either way. So as much as I like to see a new champion, man, I just want to see a good game. I think that's what a lot of people took away from last year is,
Right.
would that game be any closer if Tommy Millott doesn't go down? Potentially, but that defense has such a hard time stopping Hunter Lipke and Kobe Johnson and even Christian Watson at times, who wasn't even fully healthy for that game. So potentially, but for me, I think a dream matchup. In terms of atmosphere wise, could you imagine a North Dakota State South Dakota State rematch in Frisco? That would, I mean,
Mhm.
in terms of interest and what would happen to that environment in that city in that stadium. I don't know if you could match it in terms of a real matchup in that national championship.
Sure. And look, there would be people in a very large landmass with very few people who occupy those land masses that would be
Yep.
excited about that, right? But you mentioned Kennesaw. I'm interested to see what happens to them this season when they play somebody every week.
Yeah.
It was much easier for the Owls to be real fresh in the playoffs when you had to win the Big South.
Yeah.
It's different playing their schedule this season. And that's been
Oh
my
yeah.
knock on them is that, how can you make them a seed or, when they haven't played anybody whose strength of schedule, it was horrible, right?
Yeah.
And, they've made some runs in the playoffs, though. So that kind of
Hmm.
silenced a lot of the critics. But I'm interested to see what happens when they have to play somebody every week, especially in an offense like the triple where you want to be, so we'll see. But, man, Frisco is a great place. I really enjoyed getting there for the championship game. Hope to see you there this year. Man, that'd
I,
be
I will
great.
be there. I was supposed
Excellent.
to last year. I got COVID right before,
Oh,
so
man. Right.
kind of ended the trip
Right.
in terms of that. But I will be there this year. I got a whole game day schedule this year. I'm going to be doing just like my own FCS game day where I pick my own games of
Nice.
the week and I just go down
Nice.
there and do it. And one of the games I'm going to, I think is going to be interesting. The final week of the season, Kennesaw has to go to Eastern Kentucky and go
Yep.
play up there in Richmond, Kentucky. And I don't
Yep.
think that Eastern Kentucky team is going to be a pushover
Parker
this year.
McKinney's a good quarterback, and
And Matthew
those.
Jackson is a
Yep.
problem
Yep.
on the
Yep.
defensive side of the ball. And I
Yep.
I, I think Wells at the head coaching spot is going to be a guy who, if he gets that thing rolling, because they landed a 4-star last year that I
Yeah, they
don't think
did.
people don't talk that Jackson State and Campbell get all the shine for the
Right.
4 and 5 stars they landed, but Eastern Kentucky got over there and they got a really good defensive back who had
Yep.
offers from major programs. So,
Yep.
but man, I appreciate you coming on the show, giving me over an hour of your time. But this time, I want to let you plug all the different things you do. I know you're so busy, got a lot of stuff going on, and let people know where they can follow you on social media and everything like that, man.
Look, just at FCS Nation Radio 1 on Twitter is the best way to do it. And wherever you get your podcast, we're going to try to do a little better with putting the podcast out earlier this year. At FCS Nation Radio 1 on Twitter is the best way. We really want you to listen on the radio if you can, but we're going to do a much better job this year getting the podcast out earlier for people to be able to listen. It's going to be a real exciting year. Really looking forward to it. And I thank you for having me, man. I could go on talking about the SoCon for another hour, but thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Guys, make sure to go follow FCS Nation Radio 1 on Twitter. I promise you, definitely a must follow if you want all the latest on FCS football news from around the country. But guys, for both of us, for the Blue Bloods, we are out for right now.